Hello, everybody. This is Miss Hetzel reading Native Son by Richard Wright, pages 207 to 210 if you're in the novel. If you're reading the PDF online and you were able to download it, it's about pages 184 to 187. Here we go, bottom of page 206. Bigger tiptoed up the steps, one at a time, hoping that the roar of the furnace and the men's voices and the scraping of the shovel would drown out the creaking sounds his feet made. He reached down the top of the steps and breathed deeply, his lungs aching from holding themselves full of air so long. He stole to the door of his room and opened it and went in and pulled on the light. He turned to the window and put his hands under the upper ledge and lifted. He felt a cold rush of air laden with snow. He heard muffled shouts downstairs, and the inside of his stomach glowed white hot. He ran to the door and locked it, and then turned out the light. He groped to the window and climbed into it, feeling again the chilling blast of snowy wind. With his feet upon the bottom ledge, his legs bent under him, his sweaty body shaken by the wind, he looked into the snow and tried to see the ground below, but he could not. Then he leaped, headlong, sensing his body twisting in the icy air as he hurtled. His eyes were shut and his hands were clenched as his body turned, sailing through the snow. He was in the air a moment, then he hit. It seemed at first that he hit softly, but the shock of it went through him, up his back to his head, and he lay buried in a cold pile of snow, dazed. Snow was in his mouth, eyes, ears. Snow was seeping down his back. His hands were wet and cold. Then he felt all of the muscles in his body contract violently, caught in a spasm of reflex action. And at the same time, he felt his groin laved with warm water. It was his urine. He had not been able to control the muscles of his hot body against the chilled assault of the wet snow over all his skin. He lifted his head, blinking his eyes, and looked above him. He sneezed. He was himself now. He struggled against the snow, pushing it away from him. He got to his feet, one at a time, and pulled himself out. He walked, then tried to run, but he felt too weak. He went down Drexel Boulevard, not knowing just where he was heading, but knowing that he had to get out of this white neighborhood. He avoided the car line, turned down dark streets, walking more rapidly now, his eyes before him, but turning now and then to look behind. Yes, he would have to tell Bessie not to go to that house. It was all over. He had to save himself. But it was familiar, this running away. All his life, he had been knowing that sooner or later something like this would come to him. And now here it was. He had always felt outside of this white world, and now it was true. It made things simple. He felt in his shirt. Yeah, the gun was still there. He might have to use it. He would shoot before he would let them take him. It meant death either way, and he would die shooting every slug he had. He came to Cottage Grove Avenue and walked southward. He could not make any plans until he got to Bessie's and got the money. He tried to shut out of his mind the fear of being caught. He lowered his head against the driving snow and tramped through the icy streets with clenched fists. Although his hands were almost frozen, he did not want to put them in his pockets, for that would have made him feel that he would not have been ready to defend himself were the police to accost him suddenly. He went past street lamps covered with thick coatings of snow, gleaming like huge frosted moons above his head. His face ached from the sub-zero cold, and the wind cut into his wet body like a long, sharp knife, going to the heart of him with pain. He was in sight of 47th Street now. He saw, through a gauze-like curtain of snow, a boy standing under an awning selling papers. He pulled his cap visor lower and slipped into a doorway to wait for a car. Back of the newsboy was a stack of papers piled high upon a newsstand. He wanted to see the tall black headline, but the driving snow would not let him. The papers ought to be full of him now. It did not seem strange that they should be. For all his life, he had felt that things had been happening to him, and that should have gone into them. But only after he had acted upon feelings which he had had for years, would the papers carry the story, his story. He felt that they had not wanted to print it as long as it had remained buried and burning in his own heart. But now that he had thrown it out, thrown it at those who made him live as they wanted, the papers were printing it. He fished 2 cents out of his pocket. He went over to the boy with averted face. Tribune. He took the paper into a doorway. His eyes swept the streets above the top of it, and then he read in tall black type. Millionaire heiress kidnapped. Abductors demand $10,000 in ransom note. Dalton family asks release of communist suspect. Yes, they had it now. Soon they would have the story of her death, of the reporters finding her bones in the furnace, of her head being cut off, of his running away during the excitement. He looked up, hearing the approach of a car. When it heaved into sight, he saw it was almost empty of passengers. Good. He ran into the street and reached the steps just as the last man got on. He paid his fare, watching to see if the conductor was noticing him, then went through the car, watching to see if any face was turned to him. He stood on the front platform back of the motorman. If anything happened, he could get off quickly here. The car started and he opened the paper, again reading. A servant's discovery early yesterday evening of a crudely penciled ransom note demanding $10,000 for the return of Mary Dalton, missing Chicago heiress, and the Dalton family's sudden demand for the release of Jan Erlone, communist leader, held in connection with the girl's disappearance, were the startling developments in a case which is baffling local and state police. The note, bearing the signature of Red and the famed hammer and sickle emblem of the Communist Party, was found sticking under the front door by Peggy O'Flaherty, a cook and housekeeper in the Henry Dalton residence in Hyde Park. Bigger read a long stretch of type in which was described the questioning of a Negro chauffeur, the half-packed trunk, the communist pamphlets, the drunken sexual orgies, frantic parents, and the radicals' contradictory story. Bigger's eyes skimmed the words. Clandestine meetings offered opportunities for abduction. Police asked not to interfere in case. Anxious family trying to contact kidnappers. And it was conjectured that perhaps the family had information to the effect that Erlone knew of the whereabouts of Miss Dalton, and certain police officials assigned that as the motive behind the family's request for the radicals' release. Reiterating that police had framed him as a part of a drive to oust communists from Chicago, Erlone demanded that the charges upon which he had been originally held be made public. Failing to obtain a satisfactory answer, he refused to leave jail, whereupon police again remanded him to his cell upon a charge of disorderly conduct. Bigger lifted his eyes and looked about. No one was watching him. His hand was shaking with excitement. The car moved lumberingly through the snow, and he saw that he was near 50th Street. He stepped to the door and said, "Out." The car stopped, and he swung off into the driving snow. He was almost in front of Bessie's now. He looked up to her window. It was dark. The thought that she might not be in her room, but out drinking with friends, made him angry. He went into the vestibule. A dim light glowed, and his body was thankful for the meager warmth. He could finish reading the paper now. He unfolded it. Then, for the first time, he saw his picture. It was down in the lower left-hand corner of page 2. Above it, he read, "Reds tried to snare him." It was a small picture, and his name was under it. He looked solemn and black, and his eyes gazed straight, and the white cat sat perched upon his right shoulder, its big, round, black eyes twin pools of secret guilt. And oh, here was a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Dalton standing upon the basement steps. That the image of Mr. and Mrs. Dalton, which he had seen but 2 hours ago, should be seen again so soon, made him feel that this whole vague white world, which could do things this quickly, was more of a match for him than that soon it would track him down and have it out with him. The white-haired old man and the white-haired old woman standing on the steps with their arms stretched forth pleadingly were a powerful symbol of helpless suffering, and would stir up a lot of hate against him when it was found out that a Negro had killed Mary. Bigger's lips tightened. There was no chance of his getting that money now. They had found Mary and would stop at nothing to get the one who had killed her. There would be 1,000 white policemen on the south side searching for him, or any black man that looked like him. He pressed the bell and waited for the buzzer to ring. Was she there? Again, he pressed the bell, holding his finger hard upon it until the door buzzed. He bounded up the steps, sucking his breath in sharply at each lift of his knees. When he reached the second landing, he was breathing so hard that he stopped, closed his eyes, and let his chest heave itself to stillness. He glanced up and saw Bessie staring sleepily at him through the half-open door. He went in and stood for a moment in the darkness.